with a quest for a United States of Africa, demonized by the West. Of course, his demise, how it was the ignominy of it as well, is what we are looking at. During his time and the African Union then and now, is it a pale picture of the African Union that we do have currently, just briefly, talking about Muammar Gaddafi, right? Let's just hear from you, Dr. Hassan Kanenje.
Muammar Gaddafi has, I think, had one of probably the most important, marks on African history or the history of the African Union. But it goes back to the history of Organization of African Unity, and where he is known to have been a very huge supporter of liberation movements, the notable one being the African National Congress. And Mandela made it a point that the first two countries he visited after he became president were Cuba and Libya. And of course, he was demonized for doing that and almost created diplomatic issues with the West. And I think Mandela was very forthright in saying, well, they were with us when you were with apartheid. And so Gaddafi's Pan-African credentials cannot exactly be doubted. But even more important, he became even more African, so to speak, if there's something like that, when he completely gave up with the inefficiency, ineffectiveness of the Arab League, which he had been advocated Pan-Arabism for a very long time, but absolutely quit. And then he became the most Pan-African person. I think the only president who used to walk around, dressed in regalia that had a map of Africa, on it. And so, to the extent and the manner in which he was removed, he was in no way a Democrat, let's be honest. Mm-hmm. But then how many African presidents have been? Okay. Mm-hmm. But one thing that was very clear is he had a passion for the continent. But then he funded lots of initiatives around the continent, and that in certain aspects actually kept even the OAU itself going, and to some extent contributed extensively to the new AU. With the Constitutive Act of 2002 that led to a newer type of AU with new objectives. Now, part of the challenge we're facing today in terms of the running of the African Union, even as Kenya seeks its leadership,
it's funding.
It's funding. The AU budget is I think slightly over $600 million, $700 million. Most of it is funded by foreigners. Which is shame. Mm-hmm. Because if we have to be honest, our budget is probably around $30 billion, even though we have to pay a lot of it, debt in terms of our debt obligations. But the continent can afford 600, 700 million. The continent can afford $1 billion. If we cannot be able to fund our own agenda, how can we control our agenda? Okay. How can we have African solutions to African problems with foreign money? It does not make sense. And so the challenge of the new, even as we bid for this position, is how can we ensure that actually the African Union funds most of its plans and projects. Two, the collapse of the state of Libya now that Gaddafi is there is directly responsible for the mess we see both in the Sahel and in West Africa. Directly connected to the kind of extremism you are seeing, but also the kind of instability you see in West Africa. And unfortunately, most of this was engineered by our partners from the West. And we have to be honest and talk about this. And so they broke it, but they did not fix it. And so it's been now left to everybody else. Right now, Libya is more divided and more broken than it has ever been. In fact, than almost any country, since the collapse of the state of Somalia. It has feuding different groups, competing militants and stuff like that, being supported by different camps, both from Middle East, Europe, Africa, and the like. It's not helpful. And if the new leadership of the African Union do not actually start looking inward with regard to how can we ensure that some of the geopolitics that are going on do not affect us. Remember, and we've even had Ambassador Mwenche on this show detailing how the mission, and Museveni has spoken to it, the African mission that was heading to Libya was literally asked to turn around because bombs started dropping on Gaddafi in Tripoli immediately, when they knew maybe there were actually efforts on the continent to try and do this. So we need to be able as Africans to say, you're no longer going to write the rules for us and dictate things for us. Because without that, the story about Libya and the Sahel and West Africa would be very different today. You see, that was the height of African humiliation. At the time, I think Ambassador Muncha was the deputy chair of the African Union Commission,
Yep.
you know, and so I'm likely to believe those people who were there. However, we can't keep looking in the past. We have to look forward. So what kind of leadership do we, even as a country, as we front ourselves, are we going to promise the continent we're going to offer that is going to be different from what has been offered, which was in certain circumstances weak and lacked vision, despite some of the success that was registered? Generally, Africans have not been very happy with the performance of AU, and we need to do better. So even as a country, as we try to front our candidate, I think we need to be able to provide a vision that is going to be a little bit different, that deals with the current realities where the world has changed, where Africa itself has more agency, but is not using it properly because we are still so chronically dependent on running our own institutions, not to mention even the regional economic groups. Some of them are not functional anymore. So if the subgroups are very weak, how are we going to be to ensure that actually the African Union is going to be strong? So the leadership we're going to offer, we have to be very clear with regard to the vision and what we're going to offer, much like what we offered to the continent when we were campaigning for the United Nations Security Council seat.
All right, thank you. Dr. Mustafa, he seemed to be also a visionary man, documented the Green Book for his country, that he did sterling things for his country as well, and he had a vision for Africa. And did that in any way also was his undoing? Because there were many vested interests.
Absolutely, Dibal. Reason why Gaddafi was murdered, and Gaddafi was murdered at the behest of the West, was because of his vision for Africa. And he was very clear. And a number of African heads of states saw actually this visionary person was going to change and was going to help this continent move forward. And so this vision had to be undermined, because for certain countries to be where they are, they have to keep Africa poor. They have to keep Congo what it is. Professor was talking about, what's going on. I believe we're going to speak about that. What Gaddafi did for Libya and for Africa was a lot. At some point, I don't know exactly how much of the percentage, but Libya was taking care of the Africa Union budget to a great extent. And when Gaddafi was killed, this dropped, and there were actually financial issues at the Africa Union. The fact that Gaddafi wanted to see one Africa, trading what we are now achieving today, or moving towards that Africa is trading within itself.
The dollarization of Africa.
The dollarization of Africa. He exactly wanted to see, so that he knew, and many scholars identified with this vision, is that Africa cannot come out of its poverty that it's experiencing today if our economy is run on the dollar or on the euro. If African economy is controlled from Paris, from Lisbon, from Washington DC, from London, Africa cannot rise. And Gaddafi saw this, and he actually not only saw this but also pushed to correct a cause. People might have difference of opinion in the manner in which he was trying to do and pushing for the way he was trying to get Africa together, and that is debatable. But the vision was there. I think Thabo Mbeki was one of the most distraught heads of state in Africa when Gaddafi was killed, because they were speaking to each other. In fact, he had actually offered Gaddafi a place in Pretoria to actually leave power, because he knew they were going to kill him in Libya, and asked him to actually go to South Africa. I was personally myself in Libya a month, rather 2 2 to 3 weeks before Gaddafi was killed. And we saw all this, the mess that were going on. The bombs were raining in Tripoli when I was in Tripoli. The AU, Ambassador Mwencha and the team could not actually get in there. And Dibal, this business is going on today. What they did to Gaddafi is actually what we are seeing, that the West trying to arm twist African countries to do what they've done for centuries in Africa. It is time, because of the geopolitical realignment dynamics that we are seeing today. Multilateralism is kind of moving, is weakening, and perhaps we put AU there because of the general. UN is a very weakened system as well now because of the war we see in Ukraine and in Gaza. And many scholars are saying that we're moving from multilateralism to minilateralism. And minilateralism here is where, a region like Africa, a region like the Arab countries, a region like Asia, they're focusing more on their issues within the region because multilateralism is not working at the global level. There are only a few countries that are trying to control everything. And the minilateralism within the African sense is what the next chairperson is going to have to focus on and lift Africa in the same manner or to the same respond to the same vision that Gaddafi had. Of course, with a lot of changes, the world has moved on, artificial intelligence. African population is essentially, 70% of the African population is below 25. I think below 25 or 35. What are, these young people with the artificial intelligence, jobs, and the resources that we have on the African continent basically being used by others. The coming AU chairperson will have to grapple with these issues and, of course, put back the glory of Africa where it's supposed to be.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. We just need to move on right now, unless you wanted to contribute.
Yeah, I had not contributed to that.
I'd asked you earlier, so I thought maybe you elected not to really. You're playing playing your
has to speak about
footsie without.
No. We were not focusing on Gaddafi at that time.
No, I'd ask you a very pointed question.
Yeah. Well, but now this is a position, and it has been spoken to by my colleagues. One, Gaddafi has never been a friend of the West. And he took shelter in Pan-Arabism first. And at that level, the Arab countries were basically fueled to be negative to Gaddafi. And he basically took exile and now back to Africa. He came back and became one of the leading voices in Pan-Africanism. Of course, one of the things he offered was his capacity to move his country from a poor country to the most, one of the richest countries in the world by that time. And not only that, that he was willing to carry the continent on his back by financing the African Union and financing African states that were weak, could not pay their fees to the African Union. And more importantly, he basically paid for the reform of Africa. And he focused on three things that Nkrumah had also focused on. First, of course, is the reform of the AU itself, from the OAU to the AU, by creating the African Union Commission. The body we are fighting for is the brainchild of Gaddafi. And not only is his brainchild, but he had a better vision for it, that it must morph it to become the African Authority. And the African Authority, therefore, become the executive wing of the continent. And then I was one of those people who were involved in drafting the African defense policy, common defense policy. And that was paid for or funded largely by Gaddafi. Gaddafi fought strongly against Leopard because he saw it as an imperial effort to break the backbone of the African Union. And he won. And Thabo Mbeki agreed to subordinate NEPAD to the African Union because they were creating a parallel body to the African Union. I say so because I was in NEPAD myself. My visa to South Africa was basically to help build NEPAD. And that was seen as an imperial agenda. Gaddafi won. And by 2009 to 2010, when he became the head of Africa, or the president presiding over Africa at that time, things came together very, very well. Now, I would say that 2011, when Gaddafi was killed, that was the dawn of the new Cold War. It's Gaddafi's death that ushered. And I think for Obama, that would be the largest blemish in his career. And a lot of questions whether he's really an African or he cared about Africa. Because Gaddafi was killed or murdered, assassinated in cold blood in his veins. And not because the Africans did not want to do anything about Gaddafi. They knew his time was up. Because they knew the pressure from the West was too much. He needed to leave. And they set a special commission. And Gaddafi agreed to leave power. But he wanted to have power peacefully in Libya. And he communicated the same to an African Union meeting, which I attended. And he said that what he wants is to see a peaceful transition in Libya. But then I don't think the French specifically and the Americans were willing to see Gaddafi alive. This was remember, the context is important here. This was a time when killing leaders as a public spectacle to warn others was important. So they hanged, Saddam Hussein as people were watching, and they literally did that with a number of other leaders. And therefore, Gaddafi was, the African version of that public spectacle. The Martin Luther King, the way he was assassinated, J.F. Kennedy, the way he was assassinated, and Malcolm X and others. It's a style in the West, very well discussed by Michel Foucault, about how you use the public hanging as a warning and as a public spectacle. You can be killed in private, but they prefer to put you in the public square, and then you are done as everybody is watching. That's what they did to Gaddafi, putting him in the marketplace, and it dampened the spirit. What is the effect of that? The fall of Gaddafi is what is now boomeranging in the coups in West Africa.
Yes.
Because Gaddafi was the major employer of the poor. You never had, during the time of Gaddafi, you never heard about these across the Mediterranean routes, because people were actually going to Libya. And if you're not going to Libya to work, then you go to Tunisia. And that's where Africans stopped. They did not go beyond there. After Gaddafi, then they sought to go beyond. Others came back with their guns, and what happened? The rise of Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb is as a result of the failure of the West to rein in. And that problem is now continuing. We will remember Gaddafi the way we do remember, Kwame Nkrumah, but more Gaddafi because he was more forceful. He pushed for the African United States of Africa and said we have no alternative but to have a United States of Africa. What the West and the rest are doing is to ensure that Africa will never unite. But Gaddafi's dream will keep us going, that we need a United States of Africa where we will have our own state, the way we do our own things, but we are part of a larger protective umbrella that prevents the geopolitics of the West basically destroying our economies and turning us into slaves in the 21st century.
Indeed. Right.
Good.
Right, we need to move on and just briefly look at also development from the Africa Union Summit, where tensions between Somalia and Ethiopia escalated over the weekend following allegations by Somalia's president that Ethiopian security forces tried to bar him from attending the African Union Summit in Addis Ababa. The incident came amid a dispute between the countries involving the breakaway region of Somaliland. Speaking to journalists before cutting short his trip, Somali President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud said the action of Ethiopian forces were part of a grand scheme by Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed to annex part of Somalia. The Somali president eventually gained access to the meeting, entering with the security team of Djibouti President Ismail Omar Guelleh. The Ethiopian government rejected Mohamud's claim and said the Somali leader and his delegation declined to be accompanied by a security detail assigned to him. Let's move on to Congo, where the M23, which refers to the March 23 date of 2009 accord that ended a previous Tutsi-led revolt in eastern Congo, is the latest in a series of groups of ethnic Tutsi-led insurgents to rise up against Congolese forces. The group has accused the government of Congo of not living up to the peaceful deal to fully integrate Congolese Tutsis into the army and administration. The rebels have been closing in on Goma in the past few weeks and are now stationed in the hills outside Sake, 25 kilometers from Goma, having blocked off the main roads to the northern and west of the city. Capturing Goma will be their biggest military gain in more than a decade. Fighting has continued despite numerous ceasefires brokered by regional leaders and the United States in 2022 and 2023. And moving on to Libya, that is Guinea, I should say. Military leaders in Guinea have dissolved the government without explanation, saying they will appoint a new one. The President's Secretary General said this, General Amara Kamara, in a video address on Monday night, added that daily business will continue as usual under the Deputy Secretary General's until a new government was formed. The West African nation has been led by a military regime since soldiers ousted President Alpha Conde in 2021. Ibrahim Sori Bangura, Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces, said on Monday that members of the dissolved government had to return their vehicles and passports as soon as possible. Their bodyguards also had to end their service, and the minister's bank accounts were frozen, he added as well. We move on to South Africa, where South Africa on Tuesday urged the International Court of Justice to issue a non-binding legal opinion that the Israeli occupation of Palestine territories is illegal, arguing it will help efforts to reach a settlement. Representatives of the South African opened the second day of hearings at the ICJ, also known as the World Court, in The Hague. The hearing follows a request by the UN General Assembly for an advisory or non-binding opinion on the occupation in 2022. More than 50 states will present arguments until February. Right, we just want to touch on those stories. We just head over now back to the Somalia and Ethiopia part over the African Union Summit. I don't know where we can begin. Dr. Kanenje, if we may just discuss that particular incident. Very interesting. Being blockaded by, the security guards of Ethiopia, you can't get access to. But what do you think? I think this also tensions will actually play also the international seals if there is something like that. This was Africa. Suppose it was maybe at the G20 meeting. What a scenario that would have been.
Except that it's not going to happen at the G20 meeting because neither of the countries is a member of the G20.
No, I'm just giving an example on international play. Yes, I'm just giving yes.
No, so Addis Ababa says that the Somalia team did not follow protocol that required, informing them that they were going to be armed and what weapons apparently they were carrying. Now, under normal diplomatic relations, those kind of issues are resolved very quickly, with the order from above, for clearance. But I think because of the ongoing tensions between Mogadishu and Addis Ababa, of course it fuels the suspicions and just bad blood that leads to some of this. I don't think this is the first time something like that is happening, from a country with security detail. But it tends to be exacerbated when there are actually tensions between countries. And I see this is just part of the theater that is going on and bad blood between Mogadishu and Addis Ababa. But that's something that, eventually is somehow an accommodation has to be found, because it's also in the interest of Addis Ababa to make sure that they're not perceived as being the seat of the African Union to be victimizing, visiting delegations, from member countries of the Union.
Right. Dr. Mustafa?
Yeah, exactly that, what Dr. Kanenji has ended with. Addis Ababa is the seat of the African Union, and technically speaking, all Africans should be, Ethiopia should be very welcoming to not just the heads of states, but all Africans into Ethiopia. And of course, there are tensions now between Somalia and Ethiopia. But those tensions, when a head of state is traveling for official function, Africa Union function, those tensions should not extend to the visiting heads of state, and they should be able to resolve those issues through very meticulous, careful planning of the head of state visit to Addis Ababa. It happened also, it sometimes does happen, or could happen in New York. I remember when Gaddafi was visiting UN. Gaddafi went to New York only once, and it was very difficult. The security arrangements had to be done prior, all diplomatic protocols had to be done properly, and this is the way to do things, especially when countries, in this case Ethiopia and Somalia, are tense. And they should have resolved these issues amicably, immediately, and not to, make a big issue out of it.
Yeah. Right. Let's hear from...
I think the spotlight is now on Ethiopia.
Yeah.
And the spotlight is on Ethiopia because I would want to simply say that whatever happened can only be blamed on Ethiopia. Whatever, dissatisfaction and mistreatment, if I would use that word, of the president of Somalia, Hassan Sheikh, is basically an indictment on Somalia itself, on Ethiopia itself. Why is it an indictment on Ethiopia? Because as the seat of the African Union, and therefore the political capital of the African continent, Ethiopia has no option. I say absolutely no option other than to have a magisterial neutrality. Magisterial neutrality in terms of visas, magisterial neutrality in terms of who gets in and who gets out as the head of state, and neutrality as to who transact in the capital of Addis Ababa when it comes to our politics. Failure to that, then we have to relocate the AU from Addis Ababa to another friendly capital, maybe Dakar, maybe somewhere else. Now, why do we say this? Because if you cannot transact in a neutral manner, and in a manner that seems to accommodate everyone, then we need to relocate. The United States is a good example for Ethiopia. You can be aligned, you can have your own views, you can be at war with one country or another, but what you cannot do, you cannot, kind of make accessing the political goods, the political resources of the world scarce for some and available for others. That's why Fidel Castro, despite his wars with the United States president, had free access to New York.
And Hugo Chavez.
Hugo
Chavez has always come there. Gaddafi could make it to New York.
Correct.
And therefore, Ethiopia has a lot to learn from America in regard to how it transacts its business. Now, two, the new militarism in Ethiopia since 2018 April does not augur well for Ethiopia as a leader of African politics. Why? Because you cannot be at war with the neighbors, and neighbors feel comfortable with yourself. Therefore, you cannot impose the same requirement in terms of protocol when you are at war. I would be foolish if I was Hassan Sheikh to allow to be escorted by Ethiopian security.
Absolutely.
How can a hyena escort the goat? No, it's true.
By the way,
because on the way it will be eaten.
By the way, it's true.
Yes.
No,
so
we need to take it very seriously.
Yes,
because, if anything happens,
they're at war.
Yeah.
And it's provided for in the protocols.
Yes, and in the protocol, the Geneva protocols and all protocols provide for that.
That's right.
That Hitler could never have provided security details for Churchill. in any meeting anywhere in the world, or for Roosevelt. Now, why does Ethiopia insist on providing security details for Hassan Sheikh when they are at war? Where do we live? What kind of a continent is this? So Hassan
What
Sheikh,
is the motive?
So Ethiopia should have made prior arrangement long before Hassan Sheikh left Mogadishu to ensure that they are nowhere near.
That's right.
And therefore to ensure the neutrality of the African Union. And therefore, I would argue now that Ethiopia is the heaviest burden on the back of the African Union. I mean the militaristic Ethiopia of Abiy Ahmed. Because when you have spelled out, and it is very clear in the public domain, we are scholars and we are researchers as well, that you have an ambition to reestablish an old empire that covers the countries of the Horn, and you must get a frontage in the ocean by force or whatever, and you have stated it, and it's on record, then I think Ethiopia needs to rethink its politics. My recommendation is, once upon a time, when Ethiopia could not hold it together during the transition from Mengistu Haile Mariam to Meles Zenawi, the Ethiopian Airlines relocated to Nairobi for safety, and they operated from here for a whole year, then went back when there was peace. At sometimes the Africans now need to start thinking about where do we relocate the African Union for safety. Even us as scholars, given what I write and what I say about Ethiopia, I'm not safe walking, even transiting through Ethiopia, because you don't know who will snatch you from the airport.
Correct.
And who is going to, and if you go to have a cup of tea with your friends, I have very many scholar friends and business friends in Addis Ababa. Can I walk freely in Addis Ababa, given the tensions in the Horn, and those of us who freely comment, right? So Ethiopia is really the greatest burden on the back of African Union.
Right. So we see this development with the Somaliland as well, and also they are overreaching to Lamu because of the port area as well. Just what they're actually seeking to do with Somaliland to get access to the ports as well. Lamu also is of a particular interest to Ethiopia. Could we also talk about it and how, maybe in light of what is going on and the pronouncement that is made, is there anything more that is beneath the interest that we need to be cautious about?
First of all, as Kenya, I think we should encourage Addis Ababa to make use of our facilities, in Lamu. It is not controversial. We are open for business, and we understand the constraints of a landlocked country. And so any peaceful avenues that we can be able to access the sea that is cost effective is going to be helpful. They're already doing that with Djibouti. 90% of the port business in Djibouti actually comes from Addis Ababa. And so using already established ports by consensus, you enter into an agreement, is something that is going to be very good for all of us. I think the challenge comes when at this point in time we want to make unilateral moves, to try this and access the sea. That not only does it destroy the peace, but it causes tensions and makes it increasingly difficult for us to manage affairs in this region. As a region that is already very fragile and volatile, the conflict in Ethiopia itself hasn't ended. We're trying to ensure that Somalia transitions from difficult times, with Al-Shabaab, but also just weak institutions. Sudan, is under almost full implosion, as in we cannot afford further tensions in the region. And so the usage of the port of Lamu, or interest in it, it is also part of the larger project and ambitions for Kenya in terms of the LAPSET. That Lamu was very important. But Ethiopia is also a critical part of the success of the LAPSET generally. And so, personally, I would not be concerned about, Ethiopia's interest in using the port of Lamu, because that is something we should be encouraging and enter into an arrangement where we can be able to do that. Perhaps it's going to remove some of the pressures that Ethiopia is facing in terms of accessing the sea, that is causing some of the tensions in the region.
Right. Let's hear from you.
Yeah, I think Ethiopia has been part of the LAPSET project, and it is beneficial for both Kenya and Ethiopia when Ethiopia uses the Lamu port. However, Ethiopia should not play the games that it's playing in Somalia, and actually it cannot dare to play those games it's playing in Somalia with Kenya, because it understands Kenya's position as an anchor state in the region. They should be encouraged in a peaceful way, in a commercial way, to use the port of Lamu, the port of Mombasa in Djibouti. What Ethiopia is doing in Somaliland, and I think it was said by the Somali president, it's akin to changing borders, having in the name of leasing land. And because of those pronouncements that the Prime Minister of Ethiopia had mentioned, that Professor Kagwanja spoke about, it's this boisterous way of saying we're gonna get an entry into the sea, whether whoever likes it or not. Is not the best way of engaging in diplomacy and in commercial activities that Ethiopia seeks. It is, of course, it needs a space, or it needs to be secure in terms of exports and imports that get into and out of Ethiopia. And to do so, it has to be done in an orderly manner. It has to be done in a friendly manner. It has to be done in the way other countries do. You know, how does Uganda engage Kenya? How does Uganda engage Tanzania? The manner in which Ethiopia is going about it is wrong, and it casts a lot of doubt on the intentions of Ethiopia and the way it handled Somalia president. There are protocols under Geneva Conventions, under many other, not just the Geneva Convention, but many conventions that actually specify the security, that defines the security of a head of state in traveling into a foreign country. When Obama comes here, in fact, it's even worse. So the US president they actually take over hotels, they take over the airport, they take over everything. We don't expect this, of course.
They jam the airwaves.
They change even the airwaves. We don't expect this for, when Somali president is visiting Ethiopia, but Somalia deserves to be treated better and in a more respectful way.
All right, Kagwanja, before we move to Guinea.
Yeah, let's make this point very clear, that the region has no problem with Ethiopia accessing ports.
Correct.
In fact, there is no country that has privileges in terms of accessing the waters of the region than Ethiopia. Ethiopia has access to the port of Assab in Eritrea. And in fact, it waged its war in Tigray from Assab. This is where the drones were taking off from as the base for that particular war. And that is now on record. It's not something that is controversial. Second, it has access to the port of Djibouti, and we've said 90% of the transactions that are taking place in Djibouti are essentially Ethiopian cargo, because Ethiopians are great business people, The second is that it has 19% stake in the port of Berbera in Somalia for all its commercial purposes. It has access to 5 ports on the Indian Ocean coast of Somalia. 5. Every state of Ethiopia, from Garmadugu down to Hirshabelle, all of them have given Ethiopia a route so that it can get its goods into the interior, and including Kismayo. And it has access to our port of Lamu. And that is the basis of the RAPSET, so that we can give access to Ethiopia. And therefore, the point is not Ethiopia's in access and even affordable access to a seaport. That's not the argument. Abiy want a navy, because since 1991, when the war, the tension between Eritrea and Ethiopia broke out, one of the development that took place that Ethiopia ceased to be a naval power because it had no access to the ocean. So now it is not interested in a port, it is interested in a region. The Zaire region between Djibouti and Berbera, that 20-kilometer stretch is what it wants. To the north, it wants the Afar region in Eritrea. and therefore it will encircle Djibouti. That geostrategic calculation to have an untrammeled or rather unhampered access to the sea to do the naval work. So Ethiopia under Abiy is trying to transform itself into a military, a regional military power, rather than an economic power. Because if it's an economic power, everybody want Ethiopia to pass through its territory. And that was the deal between President Kibaki and Meles Zenawi. Because we want Ethiopia to access our ports at the most affordable rates that we can. Ethiopia under Meles was also reciprocal. It was making its hydroelectric power affordable to the region, particularly here in Kenya, at the most affordable rate globally. And if you look at the agreement between us and Ethiopia in supply of geothermal power in the north, particularly our Moyale northern belt, it is the cheapest. It's cheaper than the Ugandan supply from us. Therefore, the region has no problem with Ethiopia as an economic power. In fact, we want to seek, and that's why Sudan was softer on Ethiopia in regard to the dam, because it's just 15 kilometers from Khartoum, and it will turn Khartoum into the most affordable electric energy from the high dam. But it is the military ambition of Prime Minister Abiy which is really causing jitters in the region. Now, for us who are Kenyan nationalists, we are worried about his Oromuma ideology. Oromuma ideology is the idea that the Oromo in the region, as part of the Kushites, are supposed to have total control of their territory. That means 4 of the Kenyan counties will be part of this new his push for new Kush, whereby Moyare, Isiolo, Tana River, and Lamu will be part of that, because that's where we have the Oromo-speaking Oromo-speaking population, and he does not stop there. He wants to unite the Kushites, and therefore he thinks the Somalis are not clever enough because they are not buying into this ideology because they are Kushites, and they are supposed to form the Cushitic alliance. Yeah, you may think that is just an intellectual hair splitting. It is not. IGAD is dead as a dodo because of that ideology. It used to be the most powerful regional economic community and regional bloc until Abiy came into the bloc. It's now finished. It cannot broker peace in Sudan, cannot broker peace in Ethiopia itself, cannot broker peace anywhere in the region. So it is simply a bureaucratic body now with no teeth. Why? Because it has been deteethed by the idea of Cushitic alliance. Why? Because IGAD is based on Pan-Africanism, like the African Union. And the moment you undermine Pan-Africanism, then it has no basis. So
this laptop, the LAPSET projects and the ports, this is just a Trojan horse?
Not really.
So to speak, no, if that is the underlying issue, that you have the Cushitic ambition and alliance, you'll use whatever means that you can actually go to do and get those places, like Lamu, like Somaliland.
The rise of
how then will you use? I mean, is that a strategy?
Actually, LAPSET is a Kenyan idea.
It's a Kenyan idea. Yeah. But let's put it this way: the rise of a new leadership in Somalia, in Mogadishu, that does not buy in this nonsense of Cushitic alliance, meant simply that Ethiopia has no ally. The fallout from Tigray after Eritrea was basically snapped from the whole peace process, like it was not useful in any way, was never consulted, has left a very bad blood. And this pronouncement publicly that they have to get an access to a seaport, they have to own a coast, either by peace or by war, has basically rattled Eritrea in a very serious way. What has that meant? Abiy and his team become inward-looking. So then, rather than going for the Cushitic alliance, which they were talking about at that time with Somalia and among the Oromo and the Somali-speaking people, he has now gone to Oromuma. Oromuma is an ideology of what you can call Oromo nationalism. and not the nationalism. Every community, the Oromo people and everybody are entitled to their, unity and identity and culture. But it is when you manipulate and weaponize the same for geopolitical reasons when it becomes dangerous. And now he envisaged the Borana, the Sakunye, the Dires and other Oromo-speaking population in Kenya, and Orma in Tana River and all the way up to Ramu, as part of this particular territory. Therefore, Lapset gets a new ideological underpinning. Under Meles, the ideological underpinning was Pan-African economic cooperation, which did not only touch on Ethiopia, but also touched on South Sudan, and even going beyond to Central African Republic. That's how Lapset was cast. And then it would coil back to Uganda and back to the Great Lakes region and possibly to the Atlantic Ocean.
Thank you.
But now it's a narrow political agenda to consolidate the new Kush. And the new Kush, for those who are historians, was the empire that produced the kind of the Queen of Sheba, and was going the one that really had access to the sea and to everything.
Yes, was a powerful nation according to the Bible.
According to the Bible, Kush was one of the largest.
Kush actually is reference to Ethiopia.
Yes,
in the Bible.
Yes, and that is the Kush.
That is the Kush that we want to claim back.
That is the Kush we are claiming back, and doing that. And because of that, Ethiopia has had 3 wars in less than 5 years of Abiy being in power. The war in Tigray, the war in Oromia region, and now the ongoing war in Amhara region. Again, it's the Fano, but essentially it is breaking the backbone of Amhara power.
We leave it at that. I think also we're strapped for time, so we should just get some headlining thoughts. We've done a full circle on Ethiopia, so we don't want just to beat it to the ground. I think it's still a developing story. So let's just get our headline thoughts. Begin with you, Dr. Kanenji.
You just concluded the African Union summit. One thing that was notable was the participation of President Lula da Silva. Lula da Silva has been a big proponent, to speak of the global south. First, by unfortunate circumstances, having been thrown in prison and out of politics, but now he's back. But then while in Addis, he made some statement that has caused some trouble. And that is, he compared the Israeli actions in Gaza to the Holocaust. And of course, Israel and allies have gone on rampage about that. Now, I just have news, and I know probably the Israel ambassador is watching here, and Israel is a friendly country to Kenya. Lula da Silva said the truth. I'll leave it at that.
Right, we shall revisit that also with South Africa and the ICJ. He said the truth, and we'll, I think, latch on it next week because we don't have time. Let's hear from Yusuf.
Yeah, I think for me, is to congratulate South Africa for the positions that it's taking, for the actions that it is taking to prevent the genocide that is unfolding before our eyes in Gaza. Countries in the south especially should rally behind South Africa during these very difficult times.
Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you.
I think I would call on Kenya to go back to the drawing board and be a little more strategic in regard to the African Union. Everything is at stake for us because the African Union matters, and Kenya will become a better and a greater nation if we are giving direction to the African Union. The way we are doing our business does not seem to get us there, because I think President William Ruto needs to set up a special presidential panel that is going to look at the best options for us beyond our political parochialism.
Fantastic. Thank you. Gentlemen, I really appreciate Music's up. Time for us to wind up the show. I think it has been a very massive discussion here, especially on the history of the African Union, morphing from AU, different leaders and different epoch of times, and how the challenges and also the highs and lows of that particular organization, is it losing its vim and verve and the gravitas as it is right now compared to some of the atrocities that are happening within Africa, especially with the flare-ups also of the coups that we are experiencing. We're here to see how this will pan out. It's a long time, to 2025, but of course the journey begins now, and the tactics and strategy and all the stratagems, they need to be on the table as it is moving forward. I want to thank you very much for your valued company. We haven't discussed a lot of issues as well, Navalny and his death and all that also is causing a lot of questions, especially where we have the US saying, you know, Vladimir Putin is squarely to blame for that particular death. We shall be looking at that and other issues next week.